Amateur Traveler is in its 20th year now, but can you imagine if I had people on the show who had never been to the destination but had just read about it or seen a movie about it? That wouldn't make any sense at all, and you wouldn't listen. We all know how important it is to receive advice from people who know a destination to get the most authentic local experience. And a great option for experiencing this is Explore Worldwide and their authentic small group adventures, led by local tour leaders, perfect for solo travelers who want to meet like minded people with a desire for adventure. I'm often an independent traveler, but two of my last three trips were with small group tours because they organize everything and it's a lot easier. If you want to recreate the tour I did to Malta, they have a Malta and Gozo Discovery Tour. I'm intrigued by one of their tours called A Taste of Sicily. The company again is Explore Worldwide, and visit exploreworldwide.com to learn more. And thanks to Explore Worldwide for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler. The nights are long, the days are short, and the weather is chilly to downright cold, depending on where you are. It's a good time to slip into a Quince iconic Mongolian cashmere sweaters, which start at only $50. You can treat yourself to everyday luxury at an affordable price with Quince. If you really want to dive into luxury, you can check out their leather handbags, washable silk shirts, and European linen sheet sets. Whatever you're looking for at Quince, all the prices are 50 to 80% less than similar brands, and they do that by partnering directly with top factories and cutting out the middleman. They only work with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing processes. And of course, they use premium fabrics and finishes for that luxury feel in every piece. But you've already heard me rave about my Quince travel pants. Treat yourself this winter without the luxury price tag. Go to quince.com/traveler for 365-day returns plus free shipping on your order. That's QUINCE.com/traveler to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/traveler. And thanks to Quince for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler.
Got my bags packed, I'm on a roll. I'm heading out there and I'm ready to go. I'm looking real good in my passport photo. Oh, no.
Amateur Traveler, episode 592. Today, the Amateur Traveler talks about old cathedrals, old markets and libraries, beguinages, and beer as we go to Belgium, to Northern Flanders. Welcome to the Amateur Traveler. I'm your host, Chris Christensen. We don't have a sponsor today, so let's just get right into our content and talk about Northern Flanders. I'd like to welcome to the show Sofie Couwenbergh from wonderfulwanderings.com, who's come to talk to us about a region in northern Belgium. Sofie, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And I'm going to let you introduce where we're talking about today, because this is not a region I knew.
No, we're talking about a part of a region in Belgium. We're talking about the Flemish-speaking part, which is, like you said, in the north of Belgium. And most people know it because it's where the famous city of Bruges is.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't want to talk about Bruges today. I want to talk about my hometown, which is Leuven, and two other smaller cities that I feel like tourists often pass on and that are really worth visiting as well, which are Hasselt and Mechelen.
Excellent.
And so these three cities are all located fairly close to one another. They can easily be reached by train if you leave from one city and then go to the other. And they can be perfectly combined into a 1-week trip to Belgium.
Bruges, I think a lot of people have heard about, but why are we heading here instead? What is there that is attracting us to this region?
Well, Bruges is known because it's a historical city and it's pretty, but really that's it. The cities of Leuven and Mechelen and Hasselt, I feel, have a lot going for them because they're all historical cities. They have a wide cultural offer, but they're also cities that are actually lived in. They're cities where constantly things are happening, where new museums are open, new shops are opened. They're cities that have something for everyone. Like I said, there's a cultural offer in all three of the cities, but they're also great if you just want to do some shopping or if you want to taste some great food, because us Belgians, we love our food. So basically, wherever you go, you can get a decent bite.
So where should we start? Should we start in Leuven then?
I would actually recommend going to Hasselt first,
Okay.
because Hasselt is a city that's located furthest away from Brussels airport if you would be coming by plane.
Mm-hmm.
And now when I say furthest, that's really relative because Belgium is such a small country.
Sure.
And you can actually get there by train within an hour, so it's not really far. But I would start in Hasselt, and I would recommend staying there for about 2 nights. That will really give you the chance to explore the city and its sights, but also maybe to venture outside of the city, because Hasselt is surrounded by pretty much nature, and it's very easy to rent a bike in the city and go out and explore lots of cycling routes or go walking and hiking if that's what you prefer. So you can really combine your stay in Hasselt as a city trip with a bit of nature or a bit of walking.
And then we're going to go from there to...
From Hasselt, it's less than an hour by train to get to Leuven. So you have a direct train. You don't need to worry about taking the car or renting a car, for example. And then in Leuven, I would stay for 3 nights, just because there's a bit more to do than there is in Hasselt. It's a very lively city. It's a university city. And actually, I think it's pretty interesting to visit in summer because it's one of the few places where it's actually calmer in summer than it is during the year. Because Leuven has a population of 90,000 people, but every year 40,000 extra students come to the city. And so they're in the city from September until June when the academic year ends, but then they leave again for summer. As I said, Leuven is very easy to reach by train. If you would want to go there directly from the airport, that's no problem either, because there's a direct train from Brussels airport, which only takes you 20 minutes. And the good thing about both Hasselt and Leuven and Mechelen, by the way, as well, is that the train station is located just by the edge of the city. So you don't need to take an extra bus. You just get off the train and you walk right into the historical center.
Okay.
From Leuven, you can take a direct train to Mechelen, so you can easily combine the 3 cities. I'd recommend staying an extra night in Mechelen, so you have that full week in Belgium. And Mechelen as well has plenty to do during 2 days. You can spend a day exploring the city. There's tons of museums, tons of nice bars to try out as well. So yeah, that would be my itinerary for 1 week.
Excellent. And then if you have more time, or this is your first trip to Belgium, we have done other shows on, for instance, Antwerp and Ghent and Bruges and Ypres in the western part of Flanders. But let's go back here to the beginning of your itinerary. What are we going to do when we're in Hasselt?
I would definitely recommend to have a look at what's going on at the Fashion Museum, because everybody knows Antwerp as Belgium's big fashion city, but Hasselt has a pretty renowned fashion museum, and they do lots of temporary exhibitions. For example, they did a large exhibition on the famous British designer Paul Smith. So if you're interested in fashion, it's always a good idea to have a look at what they've got going on.
Okay.
And then another thing is as we say it, Genever Museum. You could kind of translate that as gin museum, but Genever is a drink that's not really the same as gin.
Okay.
The drink is very typical for the region, and it's only made in Belgium and the Netherlands. And why I would recommend going there is because when I did, I had expected to find a very old-fashioned museum with some bottles and maybe some historical explanation about the drink. But what I found was actually a very modern and a very interactive museum where you didn't just learn about the history of the drink, but also about how it impacted society. Because, for example, gin became so popular at a certain moment that the Belgian government banned it because so many people were drinking it. And then the museum also teaches you how you should drink gin, because you drink it in little shot glasses, but there's a specific way of pouring it and of taking the first sip. And of course, that's something you can try out afterwards when you go to the museum's cafe, where you can order a gin of your tastes.
And you said that this is not quite gin, that this is actually a different drink. Is it still made from juniper?
Yeah, I have to say myself, except for gin or our Genever, I don't really drink alcohol.
Hmm.
So I don't know the specifics anymore of the brewing.
Okay.
But the way that it's made is particular to our region. And I think it's a bit like with champagne, that when it's made somewhere else, you're not supposed to call it
Got it. Okay.
champagne, but you have to call it something else. Yeah.
Sure.
So it's a bit along those lines.
Well, and I want to get back to the fashion museum a little bit here. What is the connection with fashion and Hasselt? I'm assuming that this is one of the old mill cities. A lot of the cloth production in Europe was centered in Flanders, especially in the Middle Ages, 1500s, 1600s or so. Is that the connection with where fashion gets started in Hasselt?
I'm sure there's a connection there as well, but Hasselt is actually pretty big on fashion still today.
Okay.
It's not as big as Antwerp, where you find all like the trend-setting designers and the really modernistic and daring designs. But Hasselt does try to profile itself, and I think it does a pretty good job in it. As a fashion city, for example, the city has walking routes that you can download from the tourism website that guide you around all the exclusive boutiques, or they have different routes that take you along all the alternative clothing boutiques. So fashion really is something that they're promoting as a tourist attraction for their city, and it's something that still very much lives there as well. It's one of the cities in Belgium that lots of people go to as well, to go shopping, and not just to go to the big change, but to see what kind of new boutiques there are and to find special stuff.
And a lot of the fashion cities also do events around fashion. Is that true in Hasselt?
When things happen, usually it evolves around the temporary exhibitions that I mentioned in the fashion museum.
Okay.
But the city does have, I think they do like a gift voucher that you can buy.
Okay.
And for example, you can gift someone a Hasselt voucher, and then you can use it in all kinds of stores, also in fashion stores.
And do you have any particular stores or shops or boutiques that are your favorite?
The thing is, when I visit these cities, I usually just walk around and I don't really pay a lot of attention to the street names. Because the thing is, both Hasselt and Mechelen and Leuven, they have such small city centers that it's kind of impossible to get lost. You kind of wander around and you're not really paying attention to where you're going. And that's why I like them so much.
Okay, but the city center basically is where we're going to look for, inside that inner ring inside the city of Hasselt.
Yeah, and that goes for all three cities. And that's also why, for example, if you're looking for a place to stay in either one of those cities, I would highly recommend you stay inside the old city centers. Because although the city may stretch beyond that ring that is typical for Belgian cities, you won't find that much out there. So all the major tourist attractions, the museums, the shopping streets, all the cool cafes and bars, they will be within that historical center, within that ring. So that's really where you want to be. Also because everything is so walkable, you won't need any public transportation to see any of the sites or to visit anything. So it would be a bit of a shame if you would, spend the night outside of the center and then you'd have to take a bus or a tram just to get inside the center, where otherwise you wouldn't need it.
And so that also makes this an interesting alternative for people who are interested in going to Europe but are not really interested in driving in Europe. This is a vacation that can be done entirely by train and by foot.
Exactly. You can move easily by train between the three different cities. You can take the train from the airport into all the three cities. And once you get into the center, you really don't need any form of transportation. Some of the cities, of course, do have buses and things driving through the center, but you don't really need them. They're more for people who come from outside the center and come to visit.
Okay. Where should we go next?
I would definitely spend an afternoon also just wandering the streets and seeing what pops up. Because, as I said, the center is so easy walkable. There's little cafes and stores everywhere. So you just want to kind of go with your feeling and see which streets draw you and what you can find there. If you do happen to visit when the weather is nice and you feel you're a fan of walking and you want to get outside the city as well, Hasselt is connected to a big walking and cycling network. So you can also spend a day just hiking or renting a bike and getting out of the city. I would recommend you go to the tourism office in Hasselt because they have maps with all kinds of routes of all kinds of distances, and you can just pick them up there and take them with you.
But do you have a favorite route that you have done?
It's called the Weiers. It's another difficult Flemish name, but it's basically a nature area that's very close to Hasselt and that you can walk or bike to. And the name the Weiers actually refers to the many ponds and little lakes that are in that area. So I always enjoy being close to the water. And as you aren't close to the coast, when you're in Hasselt, a lake is pretty much the best thing you can get. So I always enjoy going for a walk around there.
Excellent. And I know you wanted to talk about the Flemish food.
Yes.
Before we leave Hasselt, we've talked about what you're going to drink in Hasselt. Is there anything we want to eat or any place we want to go before we move on?
Yeah, actually in Hasselt, there's a place, it's a restaurant, and it's called the Smaaksalon, which literally translates as the salon of taste.
Okay.
You can get a 3-course menu, and everything is prepared with locally sourced ingredients, mostly vegetables that are typical for the area and that are also seasonal. So it's not specifically about one certain product.
Mm-hmm.
It's a good place to try like real Flemish food if you want. And it's real Flemish food, which is usually, I wouldn't say basic, but more like rough food, like farmers' food.
Okay.
And they prepare everything in a very refined way. So if you want to get to know many different flavors during one meal, I would recommend you go there.
Okay. Excellent. And then I think you were getting ready to move us on.
To Leuven, which is my hometown right now. It hasn't always been, but when I was little, my parents used to take us to Leuven quite a lot. We would come shopping here. We would go to the movies here. It's also where I studied, where I met my partner. And afterwards, obviously, I moved in with my partner, and I've been living here now for 8 years. Still not tired of living in this city, so that's why it definitely had to be on the itinerary. I think Leuven is a great place to come because on the one hand, it's a very historical city. It has a university that dates back to the Middle Ages. It has lots of beautiful historical buildings. But then on the other hand, it's a very lively city because of all the students that you find here. And an additional benefit to all those students is that Leuven, in comparison to many other popular cities in Flanders, is not that pricey. All the restaurants, all the cafes, keep in mind that they're also catering to a student audience, an audience that doesn't have that much money, let's say. So Leuven is still a place where you can pay, say, a normal price and not a city price for a beer or for a cocktail or for a basic meal. What I also like about Leuven, apart from the fact that the center is very walkable like in the other cities, is that you can either choose to follow like the typical popular path of the big shopping streets with all the chain stores and all the big brands, but then you can also head into the little side streets and you'll find stores like there's this one toy store that sells the old kind of wooden toys.
Mm-hmm.
And they have this massive collection of board games to play. And it's very unique, I think. It's called the Grasshopper, by the way. And it's just a store that even entering as a grown-up, you feel like a kid again and you don't want to leave anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I always have to be careful because I always make up excuses to buy gifts for everyone when I go in there. And then actually they're gifts for myself. It's that kind of store.
And you mentioned it had a number of historic buildings. Are there 2 or 3 that you would recommend?
I don't know if you know this, but Belgium and the north of France are the only areas in the world which have what we call beguinages. Now, it's not even a real English word, but it's the word all tourism boards use to translate what we mean when we say beguinages. And they used to be closed communities of nuns living together. So no men were allowed in there. They were always close to a church, and they lived according to a certain rules. Those kinds of nuns don't exist anymore, but the communities in which they lived, like they were all, let's say, houses around the center court. Usually they're recognized as UNESCO cultural heritage, and I believe Leuven is the only city in the world that has two of them.
Well, and what I'm seeing is the difference between this and a convent is this is laywomen. This is not nuns. Interesting. I wasn't familiar with this.
So they would usually be single women who wanted to devote themselves to Christianity, but who weren't entirely, let's say, nuns. They did follow a lot of the same rules, though not all of the same rules. Yeah, they lived in these communities, and a lot of them lived in like really small but very, what we now would call very Instagram worthy houses. All in the same colors with nicely decorated windows and flowers everywhere. So Leuven has one very big beguinage with a big church which is still in use, and then one very small one which now I think there's only one street left of it, and that's protected. It used to be bigger, but because of the city expansion and companies entering the city, etc., part of it got lost. But so those are two historical sites I would definitely recommend visiting.
And the big one is the Groot Begenhof?
Exactly. Okay. So it literally translates as the big beguinage.
That's why I figured that was probably the big one. I know just a little bit of... one. Yeah, exactly. I had never heard of this, and yet when I looked it up on the internet while you were talking, I saw a picture of one that I have been to in Bruges, and I had no idea what I was looking at. So, interesting. Okay.
Yeah, Bruges has one as well. Yeah, there's a lot of Belgian cities. I think there's 11 in total or something in Belgium. But yeah, so Leuven has two. And what I also like about these places is that they're like little places of peace and quiet within the city. So especially, obviously, the small beguinage is only one street large, so you can't expect that much of it. But the big beguinage, although it's currently like students living there and academic staff, they still have this rule that it needs to be quiet there and that you can't have parties or you can't make a lot of noise when you're outside with friends. If you need to get away from the hustle and the bustle of the city for a bit, those are nice places to go.
Excellent.
Another historical site that I would recommend and that I think a lot of people miss is the Botanical Garden of Leuven. And that garden is actually older than the state of Belgium itself. It was founded by the university before Belgium was founded, and it was founded purely as a garden for academic research. So they used to only have herbs there, and they would use them for medicinal purposes and for study. Now they also have other kinds of plants and just pretty flowers, and it's a nice place to go in summer to just sit and read with a book. It's not that big, but it's pretty lovely. Just like the Grand Beguinage, it's located a bit away from the busy shopping streets and where most of the things in the center are going on. So it's a bit of a more quiet place. And if you're really interested in plants and flowers, you can get a guided tour there as well. And they will tell you all about the kinds of plants you see, but they will also tell you something a bit about the history of the place.
Okay.
If you go more towards the center, what's really interesting to me, I think what you should really visit is the university library. I've spent many hours there looking through books because I studied literature, and many of the literature books are actually kept in that main library. But what's so nice about that building is that it looks really old. It looks medieval. It has this grand hall with books stacked to the ceiling, wooden floors, big wooden staircases. But actually, it was built after the Second World War. It's only meant to look as old because the Germans had bombed the original library, and afterwards they felt kind of bad, and so they donated money to the university to build a new one. And so they're just pretending now that it's an old library.
Sure. Well, that is not uncommon in European cities, unfortunately. Either World War I or World War II took out a lot of cities.
Exactly. What's, by the way, also interesting about the university library is that it has a tower with a carillon, and they play music every evening, I think it is. And you can even go up to the tower and visit it, and then you have a great view over the city. And in summer, they'll do concerts there. and they'll just place like beach chairs on the square in front of the university library, so people can lie in the chairs, look up at the tower, and enjoy the music.
That's awesome.
Just in the middle of a square. Yeah, it's pretty neat. It's one of the main reasons to visit in summer. One of the many reasons I was going to say to visit in summer, because there's always something happening in Leuven. Even though it's a pretty small town, we have lots of events, picnic afternoons, food truck festivals. Literally every weekend in summer, there'll be something happening. And it's kind of impossible to miss it because the city is so small. You just have to follow the crowds and you'll find what's going on.
One correction, what I see is that the library wasn't built by the Germans, but was a gift from the American people after World War I.
Oh,
so
yes,
we want to give
correct.
credit to where credit is due here. And the nice thing I'm
correct.
seeing
Yeah.
is that there's still a lot of the original buildings in the town as well. The town hall, for instance, from the 1400s. And so it's fortunate that while the library was destroyed, there were still a lot of existing buildings, the cathedral and such from the Middle Ages.
Yeah, it's not like in some European cities where literally the entire city was bombed flat. Yeah, we were pretty lucky.
And it was World War I, too. It was the other difference. But other than that, it was...
History's never been my strong suit. But it doesn't change the fact that it's a very interesting place to visit and a lovely place to visit as well.
Excellent.
Now that you mentioned City Hall, by the way, you can also visit City Hall. It has to be done with a guided tour, but they do a tour, I think, almost every day. What's particularly interesting about City Hall is the outside of the building, because the entire outside of the building is covered with statues of prominent Flemish figures. So personalities like scholars, but also politicians. And I think there's over 100 of them or something in total. It's pretty impressive.
It looks gorgeous. The whole town square looks really picturesque. You talked about being Instagram worthy. I think we could credit that as well. Excellent. Anything else we want to do in Leuven?
Well, when you visit Leuven, you should definitely go to the Oude Markt, which is the old market in Dutch. And I think it lost the title now, but it was very proud for a long time that it could call itself the longest bar in the world, because I think except for one building, every single building on that square is either a restaurant or a bar. And it's a large square.
Okay.
So this is the place where in summer everybody goes and sit on the terrace. Sometimes you can spend like 20-25 minutes trying to find a chair. It's so full. And so during the day people will just get drinks and get food. And in the evening what happens is that many of the cafes will put the chairs aside, will put the tables away, and they'll turn on the music, and this is where you can go dancing. So Leuven doesn't really have big nightclub, but everybody just goes to that square and goes dancing in the bars.
Excellent. Yeah, I think that title, if I Google that, is what I thought it was. Usually that title now refers to Dusseldorf and the Altstadt, which has 300 bars, but you can drink in more places than just one in Europe, though.
You can definitely
And you can probably find better Belgian beers in Leuven than you can in Dusseldorf. So
that's what I was going to say next, because Leuven is the hometown of the famous Stella beer.
For some of the listeners, you're really burying the lead here. That if you had started with that, they would have booked their tickets by now. But
they don't want to give the wrong impression. But we're talking about Belgium, so we have to mention beer at some point, right? Well, Leuven is the hometown of the Stella Artois beer, which is now part of the big international concern AB InBev. But the brewery is still, one of the breweries is still located in Leuven, and you can actually go and visit it. You can get a tour around the brewery, and of course there's a tasting session afterwards as well. So in terms of tasting, that's definitely something you need to do in Leuven. Yeah, and then one other thing that I would recommend is, it's not that well known, but we have a specific kind of chocolate here, and it's called a Fonske. And Fons comes from the name Alphonse, and he's actually a little statue that you can find on the Pieter de Zomer Square, which is right next to the Grand Place. And it's a statue of a little man that's reading a book and that's pouring a drink inside his head. And it's kind of referring to the student studying, but at the same time drinking lots of Stella.
you say it's a different kind of chocolate, but what makes it different?
The chocolate in itself isn't really special, but the chocolates have the shape of the little man.
Ah,
So
got it. All right.
Chocolate is pretty big in Belgium as well. So if
yeah,
you're not a big
chocolate
fan
is pretty good in Belgium too.
Yeah.
I think the first night I woke up in Belgium at a hotel in Belgium and they served breakfast and it was croissants and Nutella. I thought I could live in Belgium.
Really?
Belgium is okay.
Mechelen, by the way, the next city I would like to take you to, also has some good food and drinks that you can try. It also has its own beer, which is called the Golden Carolus. It's been brewed since the 15th century, and you can still visit the brewery that brews it. So the brewery is called Den Anker, which is translated as the anchor, like an anchor of a ship. And you can visit it, you can get a tour there, and they also do tastings. And of course, many of the cafes, if not all the cafes in Mechelen, will serve you that beer if you ask for it, because it's very local.
Okay.
And then they don't have their own chocolate, but they do have their own cookie, which comes sometimes with chocolate or sometimes just with a glazing. And the cookies are translated as those that put out the moon. Now, in Dutch, it's just one word. In English, I can't really translate it, but it's called those who put out the moon, and it's actually connected to a city legend, which is pretty funny. So in Mechelen, you have this big tower, which is called the Rumbold's Tower, which you can also climb, by the way. You can climb to the top of the tower, and then you have a great view over the entire city. But the legend goes that one night, a guy stumbled out of a cafe. He had a bit much to drink, and he looked up at the tower, and the tower was in flames. A fire had started. And so he panicked, and he started running around town screaming, "The tower's on fire! The tower's on fire!" Everybody came out with buckets of water. They formed a long line. They climbed all the way up the stairs to the tower. And then when they got upstairs, he noticed there was no fire. The only thing he'd saw was the shining of the moon behind the clouds, and he thought that the tower was on fire. And so the story spread, and everybody made fun of the people of Mechelen, and now they are referred to as those who put out the moon, because they thought that the moon was on fire. That's a legend that those cookies are named after.
And is that the tower on the market square, the Grote Markt?
Yeah, it's actually on a small market square next to the Grote Markt. The Grote Markt is where you will find the city hall and the belfry of Mechelen, which is also a UNESCO World Heritage Site, by the way, as are most of the belfries in Belgium. And then there's a small square next to the big square, and that's where you will find the tower. Across from the tower, by the way, is a very lovely coffee shop and bakery where you can order sandwiches with Nutella.
Okay.
Now that you mention it. Yeah, we do everything with chocolate over here. It's not that bad. In terms of things to do, there's quite a lot in Mechelen as well. Now, what surprised me about the city is I went back last summer, and before that, it had been a while since I'd been there. And they actually did a really nice job of modernizing the city. And I almost want to say cleaning it up. It's not that it was a dirty city, but as it's a historical city, it kind of looked old in certain places and not in a good way. And so they put a lot of money and a lot of effort in renovating, let's say, the entire town. And now you have nice walkways along the river. All the streets have been renewed, and it's become a much more pleasant place to walk around in. And for example, one of the things they did is you have a river going through the city center, which is called the Dijle. And they have this wooden path that runs right along the water. And so it's actually a level down from the street. So it's a nice place to just go for a quiet walk, even though you're still in the middle of the city. And what's nice is that it takes you actually along the back of certain buildings. Now, if you don't like walking, you can also do a boat tour on the river. So then it'll just take you to the little canals, and you get an explanation about the history of the city, which can be nice as well. It does have to be nice weather, though, because otherwise it's not so much fun.
You mentioned nice weather, and summer has been what you've suggested so far. A particular month?
Between June and the end of September.
Okay.
So not necessarily July and August. Those months can be a bit pricier as well.
Sure.
But those 4 months tend to have the best weather. The problem with Belgian weather is that it's very unpredictable. It can be rainy and cold one day and then super hot the next, and then rainy and cold the next again. But I would always recommend to bring an umbrella or a rain jacket, though, just because you never know.
Sure. Well, that's true for Northern Europe, period.
Now, another one that's really interesting is the Caserne d'Ossat, it's called. Mm-hmm. And that's actually, it's an old, I don't know if you've heard of it. It's an old army caserne, and it used to be not a deportation, but a transportation camp during the Second World War. Mm-hmm. So this is where people from the north of France and from Belgium kind of were gathered before they were put on transportation to the camps. It's a very modern building that focuses both on the history of Jews in Belgium before and during the Second World War, and then also focuses on everything that happened during the Second World War and the effects of it afterwards. You can definitely spend a few hours there if it's a rainy day. It might not be the best thing to do if you have kids with you, because it's like, as you can imagine, it's pretty heavy. It's not the most joyful visit. But if you're interested in history, and especially in World War history, I would highly recommend it.
Okay, so that's the Jewish Museum of Deportation and Resistance?
Yeah, I think it has a bit of a different name in every language.
Sure.
Another thing that's UNESCO World Heritage, and this goes for all of Belgium, is our carry-on. I don't know if I pronounce it correctly in English, carry-on culture. So the carry-on is not the same as an organ in a church.
Oh, carillons.
But it's kind of, carillons.
The bells from the belfry? Yeah, okay.
Exactly.
Carry-on for us is the suitcase that you bring with you, so.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I wasn't sure, should I pronounce it in the French way or... But so Mechelen actually has a world-renowned school to learn how to do that, and you can also go visit it, and you can get a tour there. Yeah, and it's smack in the center of the city. The entrance is actually in the biggest shopping street, which is called the Brûle. So if you go shopping on the Brûle, you'll walk past the building, and you can, like, sometimes you can hear them play music, and you can get a little glimpse inside. But I think if you want to take a tour, you do need to book it in advance.
Anything in terms of surprises when I go to this region in Belgium? What's going to surprise me?
It's not, I don't want to say density. I think it's the compactness of the three cities. Mm-hmm. I think it's the easiness with which you can visit them. Like you mentioned before, you don't need any kind of public transportation. You don't need a car. Everything is within reach. You never need to worry about getting back to your hotel somehow late in the evening. Everything is just super easy, and it's I think they're all three very relaxing places to visit because you don't need to worry about anything. You have everything close by.
Anything else we want to cover before I get to my last three questions?
If you've been before, or if you have an extra day and you're not quite sure what to do, they all three have options to just get outside of the center and do something else. In Hasselt, there's lots of walking opportunities and cycling opportunities. In Leuven, actually, just outside the city center, there's a big forest where you can go walking, where you can go horseback riding, where you can even go mountain biking. And then in Mechelen, and you can just take the bus or the train to get there. This goes for all three places. In Mechelen, it's kind of like an artificial beach with playgrounds, but also with walking opportunities where you can play like beach volleyball. So if you just want to get out of the city in summer and have a good time outside, that's where you could go.
And what's the name of that?
That's called the Neckar.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And it's actually also the name of one of the two train stations in Mechelen. So if you don't go to the city center train station, you can just go one stop further or closer, depending on where you come from. And you'll get out the train and you'll be right there.
Excellent. Last three questions. Of all the cities you've talked about, you're standing in the prettiest spot. Where are you standing and what are you looking at?
I really like standing here in Leuven, in my hometown, at the La Deuze Square, which is the square in front of the university library. Okay. Because it's a very big open space. And I just love the view that you have of the library and looking up at the tower.
Okay, sitting in your lawn chair.
Sitting in my lawn chair, listening to the music.
Excellent.
Ideal. With a little chocolate on the side.
One thing that makes you laugh and say only in Flanders, only in this area.
When we order our beers here, especially in Leuven, when you go to the bar, and it's a bit rowdy and you want to order a beer, but there's too much noise, you just lift your pinky.
Oh, okay.
So you'll just lift your pink finger and the waiter will know what you want and he'll bring you a beer.
Well, that is true in other places. I know that's true in Germany, but it's tricky. In Germany, if you hold up one finger like we would in English, that's two.
Yeah.
You start with a thumb. And so my German teacher back in high school said she kept getting two beers because she was holding up one finger. But it's start with a thumb, where we're starting in the pinky in Belgium. Interesting to know. Useful. I wonder what happened.
We don't start with pinky, so you can only do the pinky. It won't work with another finger.
Okay, you can't get three beers.
If you want 2 beers, if you want 3 beers, you'll have to do the pinky, and then you have to show a 3. Otherwise, they won't get it.
And if you had to summarize Leuven and these 2 other cities in 3 words, what 3 words would you use?
Historical, cozy, and relaxed.
Historic, cozy, and relaxed.
That's what
Excellent. Our guest again is Sofie, and I'm going to try again at Sofie's last name here. It's one of those Flemish names. It's Couwenbergh, and you can see how it's spelled on the show notes. And from wonderfulwanderings.com. And if we were going to wonderfulwanderings.com and looking for the best post you have on this area, what post are you going to direct us to?
My Belgium post, actually, which has not only information about these 3 cities, but also practical information about how you can take the trains between them and what things you should take into account when traveling to Belgium in general. So I think that post would definitely help you.
Excellent. Well, Sofie, thanks so much for coming on Amateur Traveler and sharing with us love for your hometown as well as 2 other beautiful towns in northern Belgium.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm glad I got to talk about them.
I got feedback this week in News of the Community from Jeff Olfs. And Jeff is actually going to be the interview on a show that is still coming up. Jeff is the recently retired senior park ranger for Joshua Tree National Park. And I think you're going to enjoy that episode. But this is what he had to say about the Rwanda episode. Hey, Chris, another great episode which brought back many memories. I finally get a podcast which I can contribute. My wife and I flew to Kigali directly from Serengeti National Park, Tanzania, on coastal air, flying over the world's 3rd largest lake, Lake Victoria. It was a Cessna. We were the only passengers. Rwanda is a land of 1,000 hills, and the drive to the mountain gorillas will show you why. I wanted to add some comments on the mountain gorilla trek in Volcanoes National Park. Each guide must daily bid to see a particular gorilla family. It looks like trading on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange. We got the Umubano family with the silverback Charles. Our trek in November was muddy and slippery. I suggest long sleeves as you may be climbing through stinging nettle. As a safety advisory for situational awareness, and I know this will scare some people, the armed rangers are not necessarily for poachers. You may be less than 2 miles from the Democratic Republic of Congo border, where rebels may be fighting Congo government troops. They had a tendency to cross the border. Just after we returned home, a Rwanda ranger, Esdras Nsengiyumva, was killed by the rebels when they crossed the border into the park. This was 2012. Having said this, the rangers take great pride in keeping the visitors safe. My wife and I would go again. Finally, prior to going, you may want to watch the movie Hotel Rwanda, which centers on the genocide. In addition to the Genocide Memorial, you should also visit the memorial to the 10 Belgium UN peacekeepers who were the first to be murdered. Their compound is preserved with the bullet holes still visible. On the bright side, Rwanda has its own version of Starbucks called Bourbon Coffee. Thanks, Jeff. Thanks so much. And you guys will all appreciate this a little more when you get to know Jeff more in a couple weeks. It's a little hard for me sometimes to remember what week we're doing because I'm often working a month ahead. With that, we're going to end this episode of The Amateur Traveler. If you have any questions, send an email to host@amateurtraveler.com, or better yet, leave a comment on this episode at amateurtraveler.com. And thanks so much for listening.